This is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Cullinan Ford. Bird Cullinan Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And good afternoon. Welcome into another edition of the Bearcast here on SicEm365.com, 365 Sports, the YouTube channel as well. Baylor Bears on SicEm365. If you haven't already, take a brief moment and go ahead and hit that subscribe button, especially if you're a Baylor fan out there. Why haven't you done that already? We got content coming your way at all times and from all different angles, and we do appreciate your patronage and appreciate you listening. As always, I'm Craig Smoak, joined by Grayson Grundhoefer. We're here with you Tuesdays at around noon each week. Garrett Ross behind the scenes producing. Jack McKenzie, well, he's off to play pickup basketball, so he's not joining us. But other than that, we are full, and we are chock full of news as well. A lot of different things to get to as spring sports rolls along, Grayson. And how are you doing after this past week?
I'm good. Yeah, I mean, another fun week, right? Just getting to sit back, watch some of these spring sports, and getting to follow basketball, of course, is always nice. So, yeah, I mean, in general, another a good week. Lots to talk about. I feel like we have a lot on the schedule this week, kind of per usual, but I feel like this week we kind of get to hit on multiple sports, which will be fun.
Yeah, we'll start off with some hoops and then dive a little into football. Spring practices still a few weeks away, but there are some movements going on in terms of position changes. That's just one of the many different things that you take note of around this time of year. Position changes, roster changes, staff changes. We've had the roster and staff changes aplenty over the last couple of months. That's finally starting to settle down a little bit. I mean, the peripheral staff still having a little addition here and there, like we saw last week with an assistant offensive line coach being added. But the roster, as of right now, settled. Transfer portals, shut for the time being. And now position changes is what we'll be able to address. And there will be more of that, I'm sure, throughout the spring. But we'll get to that as well and get to your mailbag to close things out as normal. Mailbag questions provided by SicEm365 premium members. So if you are not a premium member of SicEm365.com, but you're a Baylor fan, encourage you to sign up and then look out for that link each week. And you can to send in your questions for us to answer every single Tuesday. But we'll start off with some basketball. I mean, there's a top 10 men's team playing just across the way, and they've got a new arena being built just across the way as well, just on the opposite side of I-35. The women's team has that new arena being built too, and they're coming off of a high last night with a win that broke their losing streak. But, I mean, Scott Drew and the Baylor Men are top 10. They're flirting with top 5, and they are on, a nice run here as of late where they've had some adversity and some challenges. And obviously the biggest challenge has been just the fact that the competition of the Big 12 is so thick. And it's been, truly a night in, night out battle to walk away with a win. But, man, they have been on a very up and down kind of roller coaster. Last week, not the most fun of weeks in the last 2 games, finally getting back to, or I say finally, but getting back to winning a couple of games after dropping the Kansas and Kansas State contest and that little Sunflower State road trip that didn't go so well. So they had that happen, Grayson, falling to the Kansas schools, but then turn around and turn around and beat Texas on Saturday. That's a top 10 win for them. And then last night, Oklahoma State in Stillwater, 74-68. So been very, very busy. When we last met with everybody here on the YouTube channel, we had the K-State game to preview, and that obviously did not go their way. But, big bounce-back wins over Texas and Oklahoma State. And obviously, you've got the element of Keontae George was injured. Del Bonner has been a true, knight in shining armor or superhero, whatever you want to refer to him as. He's been massive these past couple of games in particular. Your thoughts on where the men sit now with just one regular season game remaining and a couple of fresh wins under their belt now at 22-8?
Very impressive week, and I think that people kind of overlook the streak that Baylor is on because of those 2 losses that they had in Kansas, but they're 12-3 in their last 15 games. They have a matchup against Iowa State in the Farrell Center to close things out for the regular season coming up on Saturday, but this is still a really good team. And this is a team that still is showing flashes of a team that could make a run in March, a team that's still, I don't think, hitting on all cylinders, even though they've played so well over these last 15 games. And, that Texas game, they showed a lot of grit because they were down, I believe it was 18-4. They made a nice run to come back in that game and really took control of things as you kind of got into the second half. And you mentioned it, Keontae George got hurt. Dale Bonner had to step in. Langston Love, of course, also had to step in to a larger role as well in that Texas game. And they both played really well. You saw the defense play a whole lot better. They were a lot more focused in that game specifically. So I was impressed by that. That was a game that easily could have gone sideways after losing those two in Kansas. They rebounded. Even with the early deficit they faced, they continued to fight. And I think that's huge for them because, honestly, when I've watched them play this year, when they've gotten into holes, they've really struggled to bounce out of those holes outside of that Texas game and then the TCU game a little bit earlier. So it's nice to see them face that adversity and come out on top. And then the Oklahoma State game was just nuts. They played so well for the entire game. And then the final 5 minutes, they were up by like 19 points. And then all of a sudden, Oklahoma State cut it all the way to 4. You're thinking, oh, my goodness. Baylor's missing layups. They're turning the ball over. They had a charge foul on Jalen Bridges where it's just like, dude, just grab the ball and bring it out and then get fouled and shoot free throws. They did everything wrong in the last 5 minutes, but at the end of the day, they came out on top. Dale Bonner made a few key free throws to close that game out. But you're exactly right. Dale Bonner had a very nice week this week, and there was an expectation coming into the year that he would play a pretty big role for them, and that just really never came to be. But with an injury, he was able to step in and play hard, and I think my main takeaway here is that, in certain matchups, I do think that he needs to be on the floor at times because of his defense. Now, I don't think he should be playing 20 minutes when Keontae comes back. I don't think he should be, I don't think Keontae is going to the bench or anything like that, in my opinion. But I do think Dale might have carved out a role and at least shown that he has more confidence than he had, I think, in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I think it's been great to see him kind of blossom here as when needed most, with Keontae going down and them obviously looking for him to fill some minutes and be impactful in the time out on the court, whereas, he's not somebody who's, been relied upon heavily. And so to just be there for your teammates, show that support on the bench. And, those are little things talked about by coaches at times, but they really ring true. I mean, that's your culture piece, right? Is a guy could go over and not be playing as much as he would like and just be, just be grumbling under his breath or
ready to leave.
Yeah, ready to leave, threatening to jump in the portal or whatever, what have you. Or you can be a good teammate, and then when your number's called, deliver. And that's what he's been able to do in particular this past week. And that's been massive for them because that was a rough trip to the state of Kansas. I mean, the K-State loss was just a little bit unexpected because you felt like they were ripe for the taking because they had beat you the first time around. Sure, it was on their home court, but, K-State hadn't been playing super well. And then now they've turned it back on. It's just like you hit them right at that time where they flipped that switch back, and they were able to beat you again for the sweep. And then, obviously Kansas was a painful loss just because it dampened your championship hopes as far as the regular season goes, and is a second loss and just tough. It was a tough pill to swallow.
The way the game went, too.
The way the game went, where you get beat the way that you did. I mean, yeah, all that added up to just, bad taste in your mouth. And so, you're wondering how this team will respond. And I just think they keep showing how resilient they are. And I think it also shows just how incredibly tough this Big 12 schedule is, where it's amazing that, you use the term night in and night out, but I don't know if that's even strong enough that to say that, because it's just a gauntlet that you have to roll through. So, yeah, that was really key for them to bounce back last night, I feel like. And now you look up, and there's just one game remaining. In the standings right now, Kansas is on a hot streak, including having beaten you recently, but 6 straight for the Jayhawks now at this point. Texas is 1 game back in the standings at 11-5, and then there's Baylor at 11-6. Half game up on K-State because they played one more game at this point. But in theory, they could finish in third place, as I guess their highest mark. Texas still with 2 games to play, so I guess technically Baylor could jump them.
And Baylor could technically get a share of the title, technically.
How?
So Kansas still has 2 games left.
Okay,
so,
yeah, they've got to. Okay,
so
yeah.
they still have Tech in Lawrence, which I think we can all. Well, Jack thinks that Tech is going to beat Kansas this week. I don't see that happening.
They've been playing better,
senior
but
night.
okay, yeah, me neither.
In Allen Fieldhouse with a share of the Big 12 title on the line, yeah, that's going to be 8-5 for sure. And so I think that Kansas will probably win that game. But then the last game of the regular season, they play at Texas. And Texas on the flip side plays at TCU, which they could easily lose that game. I think Texas could easily lose both games. But yeah, Baylor's still stuff to play for here as they get ready for that Iowa State game. And then of course, Kansas State actually has the tiebreak against Baylor as well. And they're a half game behind because they've played one less so far.
Yeah, I mentioned that with K-State. So, I mean, all they have to do is just, take care of their business and they'll finish ahead of Baylor because of that tiebreaker. But yeah, Baylor's a step ahead because they played on Big Monday, so they're a day early. But, yeah, most other teams do have 2 games remaining. So, yeah, Baylor with the 1 game against Iowa State upcoming. So, yeah, in theory, there's a shot. I just haven't really seriously considered that because Kansas has been so hot and Texas just kind of remained above them. But, yeah, in theory, there is I guess numerically there is a shot, but – not the strongest of shots, but hey, take care of your business and see what happens.
Yeah, I kind of think this is going to be a situation where Kansas beats Tech and then loses to Texas and Austin, but Texas loses to TCU and then beats Kansas in the last game. So something along those lines. I think Kansas will finish 13-5. They'll win the conference, and then Baylor. I actually think Baylor has a great shot at getting the 2 or 3 seed because I do think Texas will lose one more, and then K-State they play Oklahoma, which might not seem like a tough game, and it's at home. They should win that, but OU's still trying to fight for something here. And then their last game of the year, they go to West Virginia in a game that I think West Virginia needs to get into the tournament. And I think that's going to be a really tough one for K-State to win. So I think they're probably going to lose a game as well, and I'm expecting Baylor to come through this weekend, but that's obviously a lot easier said than done.
Sure. So that was big for them to get a win last night, at least give themselves an opportunity to see if chaos can unfold. But for now, I have to sit back, try to get healthy as you can with Keontae George and, just time for that stretch run now.
Langston Love as well, because he apparently scratched cornea. He didn't play at the end of that Oklahoma State game, and you started to see the guards get tired, I think, as they were turning the ball over. And so keep an eye on that as well, because if you're going into this last game and you just have Bonner, Cryer, and Flagler, like you're asking a whole lot of them if you don't have, those other 2 big pieces.
Yeah, and that's been your strength, right, is your guard play. And all of a sudden you're down a couple guys and you thin out the ranks a little bit, and that can go from a strength to not necessarily a weakness, but, far less of a strength than it once was, a part of your team that's really been able to carry you and lead the way for you at times. So, yeah, I mean, that was unfortunate with Keontae. I was just very thankful that it was not anything more serious. I think everybody was. Initially you're thinking with any type of, injury where you're trying to get off the court as fast as you can and get to the back to get checked out. I mean, I understand big-time NBA superstar prospect, so, like, anything with him you're kind of, like, handle with care. Yeah. But, especially when he is the caliber of player that he is and you're all the way towards the end of the season and here comes March and all of a sudden he's going down and being rushed to the back. It's just like, oh, my gosh, what a nightmare scenario. But they did leave everybody with the, update. I guess it was pretty shortly thereafter, the following day, we got the update from the Twitter account, which I'm appreciative of. It's like, if you have that information, pass it along rather than have everybody speculate or have to go grab a source. But they let us know that Keontae George had been checked out and that it's a mild ankle sprain and that he was not going to play last night. So we knew that going in. But now it's just day to day. So we'll see if he played against Iowa State. That would be sort of surprising, but good news. If he doesn't play, I think everybody will be totally fine with that. Just get him ready for the postseason. But where do you stand with that?
Yeah, I kind of think they're going to wait till the Big 12 tournament to play him. But the thing of it is, and this is where it's tough, and also I think the status of Langston is going to be just as important because it's very much like you need one of those guys. Like it's very hard to win with just 3 guards in your rotation. But yeah, I think Baylor needs to continue to have momentum here, and Baylor's also going to need to figure out what do you do with this, with Dale Bonner playing well and Keontae coming back. How do those minutes kind of line up? How do you make sure you're maximizing both of them? they have a lot to think about, and I think you have this time. You have these couple games to sort it out before the tournament. So I think Q will probably be back for the Big 12 tournament. If not then maybe they just hold him out all the way till the NCAA tournament, which wouldn't be shocking either, in my opinion. Just make sure he's 100% healthy.
Yeah, I was just looking around to see if there's any kind of an update similar to George, and nothing yet. So we will see on Langston Love. But you're right. I mean, want to be as healthy as you possibly can, and can't afford to have both of those guys missing any significant amount of time.
And one more thing to mention, if Baylor does win out, they're still playing for a 1 seed. And Baylor's never won the Big 12 tournament. And so you would think that this would be a time where you got to be thinking to yourself, well, if we're actually playing for something here where you can win out and actually get a 1 seed, that's a big deal, and that might be something also on their minds. But I find that highly unlikely if you don't have Love and George in your lineup.
Yeah, that's maybe biting off a bit more than you can chew, but also they need some things to happen around them as well. So that's not entirely in their control, but the good news is they have set it up to where they're in a position that if things go kind of haywire, and they also beat Iowa State, which is not a given by any means, but if they can take care of that, then we'll see where the chips fall, and maybe they catch a little bit of a lucky break. But regardless, they do have that Big 12 tournament they've never won, as you mentioned, and that would be a nice feather in Scott Drew's crown or cap that he has not been able to earn just yet. And this seems like a team that's ripe for being able to do that. But certainly with healthy guards and not with a couple of guys missing time, which is a possibility as we sit here right now. Later on tonight in the Big 12, Texas Tech at Kansas. You mentioned that game. That'll be a huge one. And man, what a year it has been in this conference. You really do just kind of have to sit back sometimes and realize how good the basketball is, and how much this can last, really. I mean, Oklahoma and Texas are going to depart. There's going to be 4 new schools coming in. That's going to change it somewhat, although, hey, obviously Houston's a number 1 team in the country caliber program with Kelvin Sampson, so they'll help ease some of the blow. But man, the basketball's so good around this conference right now, and for the past, however many years that you want to consider it, certainly the last couple, and what a ride it's been, and still a lot to go. But I'm ready to see how, all these teams fare in the tournament. How many teams get in? Because, like, Oklahoma State probably had their flame extinguished last night.
They're still on the bubble.
I know they're on the bubble, but it's like, how many games in a row can you lose? Well, they can only lose so many because the schedule's about to end.
So I think everything I've heard, there's 6 locks. It's Iowa State, TCU, Kansas State, Baylor, Texas, Kansas. That's your 6 locks. They're going to be in the tournament, and then it just comes down to West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Tech. And those 3 are all still on the bubble, but you got to think there's probably only going to be one of them that gets in. You would think, depending on how things play out in the tournament in these next couple weeks. West Virginia is the one that I think they're going to beat Kansas State the last week of the year and find themselves right there in the tournament in my eyes. So that'll be interesting to watch. One thing, you mentioned the Big 12. I don't love giving a lot of credit to Kansas or to other schools in the Big 12, but I found this stat rather interesting. Bill Self has won 17 Big 12 championships in 20 years in the Big 12, which is shocking knowing how good the Big 12 as a conference is. Coach K, in 43 years, won 13 ACC titles. Just something to think about. I've heard that a couple times, I know, from various outlets, but I just find that to be rather interesting, and they have the inside track to winning another one this year.
Yeah, it's impressive. They, to, I guess, Duke's credit, they have North Carolina to contend with year in and year out.
Maryland won a championship.
Yeah,
like other
but
schools won
I don't want to diminish what you said
yeah.
too much. Although I know that anytime you try to give Bill Self like any type of credit, it's automatically raining hell in your mentions because he's a cheater and everything else. Yeah, so it's a weird dynamic trying to give credit, but also get the feedback on doing so. But yeah, I mean, Kansas has been a juggernaut, and they are still the top dog in the top dog conference right now. And I think that's evident by just the night in, night out. I keep using that term, but I don't know how else to explain. Just every single game, truly, you're going up against a really good team. So been fun to watch, been a grind, and not quite over just yet. But one more to go for the Baylor men, and yes, a slim but still remaining chance to try and grab a Big 12 regular season championship, although Kansas does have their hands on the steering wheel at the moment, and Iowa State coming up to close out the regular season. Meanwhile, on the women's side of things, it's been a roller coaster of a year. but they are now 19-10, and after a 4-game losing streak, they have now won 3 straight games, and thankfully they did that, because that 4-game losing streak, man, things are starting to feel really, really sour and down, and not so good surrounding, the program. Not in grave terms by any means, but it's just 4-game losing streak. That doesn't happen to Baylor women's basketball ever. I don't know that I had seen that ever, and so it was just a bit alarming to see them on that skid and start to realize, hey, you're not just losing games, but you're losing your stranglehold on a tournament spot if you're not careful the way you close this out. So it was massive for this team to go on the run they did over the last week or so, getting a win against TCU last Wednesday. So after we recorded, turned around, beat Texas Tech 71-61. So 2 wins in a row. The TCU game was in Fort Worth, won that one by 10, came home, beat Texas Tech, won that one by 10. And then last night, number 12 Texas in Austin. Raise your hand if you had the women, almost the Lady Bears again. Put a dollar in the jar. We probably should have done that. We'd have $1,000 by now. But the Baylor women go down, 35, and I know I wasn't expecting any, big, huge upset. Even though they had won a couple of games, just figured, hey, Texas is borderline top 10 and one of the better teams in the conference along with Oklahoma. And there were the Bears with an impressive win to win their 3rd straight, 63-54 over the Longhorns. So they do jump up and bite Texas at least once this year. And that's a team where, as competitive as Texas has been, with the old regime, that was as automatic as anything, was beating Texas and pretty much winning the Big 12 every year. And those things aren't so automatic these days, but just a massive win for this program. And you could tell it meant a lot to them. 63-54, so that's now 3 straight, 19-10 as I mentioned. And they don't have an outside shot to jump up and win the Big 12 regular season championship because of where they're positioned. But they are in the upper, third of the conference, and should remain there, as they just have West Virginia to close things out. And that comes up this Saturday at the Farrell Center. But your thoughts on the little run that Nikki Collin and company have gone on here as of late?
Yeah, Texas was an 8.5-point favorite. So this is a pretty big upset for this Baylor team. They're currently 5th in the Big 12 standings. Really need to beat West Virginia. If they're able to, they can actually tie for 3rd. They're right there with Oklahoma State and Iowa State. West Virginia right behind them, trying to find their way up. But yeah, Baylor played really good. Dariana Littlepage-Buggs continuing to play great. She had 19 points, 13 rebounds, and then Sarah Andrews, 17.7 rebounds, continues to have an excellent season. The two of them, I guess, they combined for 79 minutes. They played a whole lot of this game and played really, really well. I was impressed. And now currently they're an 8 seed. I do think if they're able to win this game against West Virginia, that could push them to the 7 line. Might have to win a game in the Big 12 tournament to get up any further than that. But things are looking up. They've solidified themselves as a tournament team now. So now it's just all about trying to get the best seed you possibly can to hopefully make a little bit of a run and make some noise in March.
Yeah, Dariana Littlepage-Buggs was the Big 12 Freshman of the Week once again. She's won that 7 times this year. And Nikki Collin had a tweet last night that said freshies. And that's one of the things they've really focused in on is the young players. And Dariana Littlepage-Buggs, one of those that has been a bright spot and, has carried them at times. And, that's certainly something if you kind of moan and groan about it's not been, just the easy kind of cakewalk that it seemed to be for so many years is, it's just different. And, if you're looking towards the present, that's a big win last night. But looking towards the future, it's like, hey, look at what a player like Littlepage-Buggs is doing. And you look at others on the roster. And, Garrett, you've been the one writing about this team all year. We've talked about just it depends on the week. It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. Last week was certainly down when we recorded. But things are back up again. And how do you feel about what you've seen over the last few days?
It's been really impressive. And Grayson let me know this morning I probably owed Nikki Collin an apology. Because when we talked about this last week, I said at best finish out the season 2-2, maybe 1-3. But, it's been really fun to watch them come together. And I think when you look at last night's game in particular, you had opportunity to go down there and play spoiler. Texas had everybody in house. They had over 10,000 people there ready to celebrate that big share of the Big 12 championship. But I still have concerns with the foul troubles. That's one thing we see night in and night out. You just go look at last night's game. Bella Fauntleroy picks up her third foul in the second quarter, which brings in, Kyla Abraham off the bench. And it was really kind of good to watch her progression. She finished the night with 6 points, but she's still really raw. But that's part of that freshman core that Nikki's talking about there. And then just watching really Sarah Andrews get into the flow of the game. You could tell she really picked up her rhythm last night, was finding open shots left and right, their creases. The ball movement was really elite. But that's one thing that concerns me, though, heading into tournament play is the fouls. They've got to find a way to be more disciplined. And then the win last night, if you look at the bracketology, they're still an 8 seed, but now they've been bumped up to where they're in Columbia, where they would be pairing up. And if they win the first round against Miami, they would have to face South Carolina. So you've got to find a way to get off that 8 line, man. And hopefully you could do that in the Big 12 tournament if you win a couple of games, get you to a 7 or 6 and kind of set yourself up for a run. But, yeah, that 8 line's not doing them any favors right now.
Yeah, certainly, and that's good news and something to definitely monitor because, that's basically rolling into a ball of chainsaws going up against South Carolina. You're not going to make it out of there looking very good, most likely. Nobody is. Going to play in Columbia, that is a juggernaut of a program right now. Baylor can attest to what that's like. They're very similar for so many years, and now Dawn Staley is kind of the queen bee of college basketball on the women's side. I know Oriema can still lay claim as well, but South Carolina is the program right now. So, the last thing you want to do is go jump up there and have to play them early on. But, what is the deal with the foul? Is it just simply a discipline thing? Because I swear it's like every game, Caitlin Bickle's fouling out like every other game, and she's a great player for them. They wouldn't be where they are without her, but it does feel like they are always playing with fire in that regard.
It is, and I think some of it's like positional. Like last night there was an instance where Bickle picked up her third foul, and Texas had they were coming down on a fast break where she slid over to try to get the block charge situation where she should just let the basket go. So she gets called for the block there. I think a lot of it's situational, and then just not having the depth. Like if you get in one or two people in foul trouble, you don't have the depth to rely on. So they're drawing inexperienced players out there, and it's just kind of a broken cycle. But right now I think it's more of a mindset and understanding the position and the play. And you got to be smart when you're picking your fouls up, especially in the position they're in. And I don't know if it's just you're lost in the moment or what, but that's something they've got to figure out and get under control.
Yeah, for sure. So that was a big win last night, big little stretch that they've been on here over the past week. But as Garrett mentioned, still some things to work on and improve, and certainly some things to try and control as best you can, like avoiding South Carolina for as long as possible. That's always a good idea. But as it stands right now, they are 5th in the Big 12. Granted, they're a game ahead, just one remaining, whereas a bunch of teams still have a couple to go this week since they played on Monday night. But Texas, 13-4, just one game remaining. But with that loss, you mentioned they had a chance to go ahead and celebrate a share of the Big 12 title. But now they have to make sure they handle business in their final game. And then Oklahoma has a couple of games remaining, but they're right there at 12-4. So they're hoping to crack a share of that championship, and that's possible thanks to what Baylor did last night. Then you've got Oklahoma State and Iowa State both at 10-6, so they each have to play 2 more this week. And then Baylor at 10-7, so 5th. But obviously we'll see if they can win their last one and what everybody else does. Could maybe climb up there to what, 3rd place, I guess, at best. But certainly a lot better of a feeling than this time last week, because this time last week it was not looking good. So big-time win, and they do deserve credit for, 5 top 25 wins? Is that what the total's up to now?
Yeah, 5.
Yeah, 5 top 25 wins, so that's a pretty good look on the resume for Nikki Collin and company.
It is, but, sadly, I think as March comes, I don't know how many of these teams are going to make it past the first weekend.
Oh, the Big 12's not very good this year, they're not.
It's just not a very good year for this conference on the women's side of things. I'm concerned that they're going to get to the tournament and just find it really, really tough sledding to even just, like I said, get past the first weekend. But we'll see. Who knows? There's been crazier things. If you get the right draw, you never know what could happen. But it just seems like the quality of the teams is down a little bit this year.
Yeah, Baylor carried the torch for so long, and, that's a big torch that went out there, albeit if you want to consider it briefly, or maybe you still consider it out entirely. Texas is not as good as they've been. I think when Vic Schaefer was hired, the thought was he was going to come in, be toe-to-toe with Mulkey, if anything, maybe be better, at least give her some hell. And they've been pretty good, but they haven't been like, the dominant force that you kind of expected, especially with Mulkey out of the way.
Yeah.
You thought that they just like cruise on through, but
they're not even a top 10 team this year, and the league's so far down.
Yeah, the league's just, they're not littered with a bunch of ranked teams. So, it kind of is almost even more disappointing in a way is that you didn't take advantage of the fact that it's a bit of a weaker field. But it is what it is. Everybody's kind of similar in that vein. But yeah, still a few things to be determined, but you definitely want to try and get the best positioning that you can and avoid, a tougher second-round matchup. So we'll see how that works out, either in their favor or not in their favor. But that was really important to go on the little streak they did, and they could win 4 straight to close it out. Going to the Big 12 tournament strong, that would be pretty big. So we'll see what they do later on this week. But definitely want to give credit to Nikki Collin and company for the big win over Texas last night. Meanwhile, in football, we're still waiting for spring practices to get underway here today's the last day of February. Tomorrow we'll turn the calendar to March, and March means spring football will be starting in just a few weeks' time. Also have, obviously, NFL stuff going on with the Combine getting underway this week. 2 Bears will be in attendance with Siaki Ika and also Connor Galvin. Last year was obviously a far larger cast. It was a record number of guys there at the Combine, and then following that, a record number of draft picks. That will not be the case this year, but it will be fun to see Galvin try and improve his stock. I think he and Ika are the only 2 guys. They're the only 2 Combine invites, so maybe this is a duh statement, but even before they were officially invites, I thought they were really the only 2 guys you would bank any money on being drafted. Ika, the only surefire no-brainer, and I think Galvin's kind of getting to that point as well, where he's going to get drafted pretty much no matter what, but just don't know exactly where that will fall, whether that's a late day 2, maybe an early or late day 3. Like, there's a pretty wide-ranging last 5 rounds, and somewhere in there is where he would fall. Ika looking more like a second-round pick at this point, but nobody's seen him work out. He didn't participate in the Reese's Senior Bowl like he was originally scheduled to. And so this will be the first time, I guess, in Indianapolis that anybody will have laid eyes on him really since, at least publicly, since the Texas finale, because he did not participate in the bowl game either, which, he probably was thankful for after, or maybe not. Maybe he was ticked off he wasn't there, because certainly anything would have helped against Air Force that night. But let's leave that in the past where it belongs. So we got that going on, some NFL stuff to follow along with, but there's some other stuff going on with football, Grayson. What do you want to hit this week?
Yeah, so earlier last week I reported that Kyan Roberts-Day is going to make the move to the jack linebacker position. Of course, he was a freshman running back this year, started off at running back. When he was recruited, it was kind of tight end or running back. Got on campus, running back was the position that he kind of fit in at. But now he's going to make the move. And this is great because it's one of those situations where you'd rather this move happen sooner rather than later, allow him to transition to the defense side of the ball, which he did play a little bit his sophomore year in high school. Played a little bit his junior year as well, but really had to handle a lot of offensive responsibilities as his career went forward there in high school. So now he's getting back to the defensive side, and right now he's about 6'3", 255 pounds. And ultimately, I think a lot of people, including myself, felt like if he was open to it, this would be a great move for him and really give him the opportunity to become, a high-level NFL prospect and a guy who could really become an all-conference guy. And I still stand by that, and I believe that. And so if he can put it all together, I'm very excited about this move, especially when you kind of take into account, the depth chart there. So I guess to clarify, Jackie Marshall is going to move to the defensive line, I believe, and there's going to be some mix and matching. He'll probably play, some Jack as well, but mainly he's going to move to the end spot. And so it's going to open up a lot of room. You're pretty much looking at Garmin Randolph, Kyan Roberts-Day, Victor Obi, Kyler Jordan, Tony Nyanwu. That's the depth chart there. So it's really Garmin Randolph and a bunch of guys who haven't really proven much. And so give Kyan Roberts-Day an opportunity, I think, to go in and potentially compete for at least a backup role or a part-time role this next season. So great for him. And then the Jackie Marshall move on the flip side of that, that's awesome for their defensive line depth. You look at Gabe Hall, TJ Franklin, and Jarrell Boykins, and you feel good about that. But then after that, again, a lot of unproven guys. So to have Jackie Marshall in there, who we got to see some great flashes of this past year, I think it makes all the sense in the world. So you're getting a high-level prospect moving to Jack. You're getting a high-level prospect moving to defensive end. And, again, makes all the sense in the world. Jackie Marshall already 281 pounds, so plenty of weight for that position. Was getting too big for Jack, in my opinion. And then Kyan Roberts-Day kind of sliding into a role where his weight is basically perfect for Jack at this time.
Yeah, I mean, Jackie Marshall is a big dude when you look out there. He always stood out a little bit more than most guys, but in a good way. So, yeah, I could see that transition, especially if he's still got room to grow even further.
Yeah.
He'd be a pretty athletic dude at that weight, I would think. So that's definitely interesting. And then the Kyan Roberts-Day move, I mean, something had to give there, right? It was either him probably moving positions or a transfer in the works, just because at running back, it felt like he was just not going to crack the lineup in the meaningful way, I guess, as quickly as people would have liked if he was going to at some point.
Bringing in Dominic Richardson basically ensured that it's going to be, you would think, Reese and Richardson, and then Quaylen had a nice year, so it's just kind of like there's not enough reps there, I don't think. But when you look at the other side of Jack, it's like there's a lot of openings there for him to come in and be potentially impactful. And we know the kind of athlete he is, so if he can translate that, I mean, his testing numbers are phenomenal, and they're the stuff of a guy that could be an NFL guy down the road.
Yeah, I mean, you look at him in spring practice last year, fall camp, working out at running back, and it looked just kind of silly, quite frankly. He was so big and so much bigger than everybody else. In comparison, it's just like, that guy's not a running back. Yeah. I mean, or if he is, it's like Derrick Henry at running back, and that's cool, but he just doesn't fit with the rest of this roster.
He was 265 pounds. To put in perspective, I believe Derrick Henry's like 243. So, I mean, he was making Derrick Henry look small.
It just looked funny. It did. I mean, it's like, is he really going to play running back? Okay. I mean, that's awesome, I guess, if he can get out there and do it, but it never really came to fruition.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
And I think in general it would have just taken time for him at running back. And the problem is his body just naturally has been progressing towards the defensive line and the defensive role because, I mean, I mentioned this on the show with y'all, but when he came in here for an interview before he had enrolled at Baylor, he was telling me he was like 285 pounds and he was just losing a bunch of weight before he got here because he didn't want to look, too massive, got down to 275, but that just tells you how much weight this guy can put on so quickly. And you kind of think about that and you go, man, Jackie Marshall's making this move this year. Maybe in a year from now, Kyan Roberts-Day's sitting there at 6'3", 280, and he's deciding to make a move to more of a true defensive end spot as well. I guess that's possible too. So just something to keep an eye on. I think it gives them another elite athlete on the defensive side and a guy who I do believe can be a real difference maker for them eventually.
Yeah, he was a, highly thought of guy coming out of high school. Certainly had some good offers. So Kyan Roberts-Day, we'll see if this is the move that makes it all click for him. But no, he wanted the opportunity to start off, on offense. And, this I think does make a lot more sense for him just moving forward. But you gave him his opportunity, like, hey, got out there, he played running back. Well, did he ever really get into the sink at tight end? I'm trying to remember.
No, it was all right when he got here.
But there was a thought that maybe that would be another spot that he would play.
That was where he was initially recruited. That's what the thought was. And also to be clear on this, I know we've mentioned, hey, like he wanted to play offense, and he did when he got to Baylor. But I will say this is a move that wasn't one of those you have to do this type moves. This was more of like a come-together decision, what makes the most sense for your future type
And it does make the most sense when you're out there watching. Yeah, it does. That seems like it's a good move all the way around. And then, we'll see on Jackie Marshall as well, a guy who seems to have some playmaking ability. So those are definitely noteworthy moves, and there will be more, I'm sure. But glad to get those there. Anything else football-wise really to touch on?
The dead period ends. That's coming up, I believe. Today's the 28th, so 28 days in February this year. So tomorrow the dead period ends, and that'll open some things up. I'm not expecting Baylor to have a ton of visitors. They'll have some throughout March, but I really think they're going to wait for spring camp to start so that guys can come and actually watch practice, because that's what a lot of recruits want to see, especially since Baylor chose to have their junior day before the dead period, which, again, I felt like was a really smart move of them. So keep tabs on that. I'm sure there'll be visitors sprinkled in throughout March, but I do think the bigger dates will be in April. And then, of course, the Green and Gold Day, they're going to have a ton of kids on campus for that spring game. So, again, be on the lookout for that.
All right, so before we move on to the mailbag to wrap this episode up, do also want to make mention of Baylor softball, who is steadily climbing the rankings, now 13-1 on the year after winning the Getterman Classic last week, going undefeated in that tournament, that home tournament, including a win over number 1 Oklahoma that briefly knocked them from the number 1 perch, but they will soon return. And they're still going to be a juggernaut. I imagine now, like, the worst part about beating them is now you have to face them again at some point. They're going to be ripe for revenge. But that was a huge win for Baylor softball last week. But then they turn around, or I guess a week and a half ago, but then they turn around and host the Baylor Invitational and proceed to go 5-0 in that as well. So now 13-1, and they've been on just an absolute tear, Glenn Moore's Bears. So your thoughts on a team that's, found itself in the top 25 is now moving up. I believe they're up to 21 last I looked. I'll double check on that.
That's ridiculous. Their one loss is to a really good Arkansas team.
Yeah,
and they
21
have a win over OU. That's too low, but I mean, I guess I get it because they were ranked so far below. Like, they're overachieving according to how many people thought they would be this year. But I think, honestly, I know they're hitting well. But in general, this all comes down to pitching for me. The way that they're pitching has been massive for them. Dariana Orm has just been on fire. She's been really pretty much perfect throughout this season, but it's more than just her. Riley Crandall's pitching well. Casey West, Aaliyah Benford. I mean, this staff is just, they're doing some great things, and I think that's been the biggest change for this Baylor softball team this year. And like we mentioned last week, they hit on their transfers as well. And so they're playing great. They're playing absolutely great. They should be right there to potentially win the Big 12. And I will also say this, though. The Big 12 is pretty loaded when it comes to softball right now. A lot of teams are playing really well. Oklahoma, of course, still only has that one loss. At this point, Oklahoma State's 13-1 also. Tech is 12-5. Texas is 11-2-1. So a lot of good teams in the Big 12, and that's going to mean a lot of competition. But I do think right now Baylor's playing like a top 10 team in the country, which is, I think, a pretty big statement and something that's a huge credit to the team. And, of course, Glenn Moore for getting things kind of back on track in what was, 2 years where they kind of struggled a little bit.
Yeah, and then, also another no-hitter last week following the perfect game. So, yeah, pitching has been a tremendous part of their success. But, yeah, I mean, this was – I don't know, I feel like there was some talk last year. Maybe I'm misremembering of, like, the fact that they thought this year would be set up to be a pretty good year.
And he did mention that. Yep.
Yeah, so it's turning out to be that way, most definitely. But, now 13-1, up to 21 in the softball rankings. And, nice to be at home for back-to-back weekends. But what a start. They're off to a blistering start, and so we'll see where they take it. But they do have a sensational pitcher. Now that's perfect game and no-hitter already this season for Dariana Orme, and that's going to be fun to see how much she can stack up accolade-wise over the remaining rest of the schedules, because there's a long way to go. But, yeah, that's fun to see what they're doing, and I just wanted to make mention of that as well. Let's get into the mailbag now. I think anything we haven't covered will maybe be covered in this, and if not, you're like, hey, what did you talk about? We'll send in a question, and you can do that by hitting the link that's up each week in the premium section of Sikkim365.com. And that's how you can get your question to us. And we'll start off with Scotty B, who says, do you think Dale Bonner for men's basketball will play more prior to the Keontae George injury? It's a weird way to phrase this. Do you think Dale Bonner for men's basketball will play more prior to the Keontae George injury once Keontae comes back? I was thinking Dale should, because of his defensive presence and the ball movement, seemed better with him in the game. Can you kind of...
Yeah, well, he couldn't have been playing any less than when Keontae was healthy. So, yeah, I do think kind of how
he will play more.
He will play more than
prior to the Keontae injury. He was not playing at all,
Yeah.
and I think that's what you're getting at, Scotty. Yeah.
Right. So I do think he'll play more. I think that a lot of this is probably going to come down to matchups and how guys are playing. Like if Keontae's playing really well, you're obviously not going to take him out. If Langston's playing well, you're obviously not going to take him out. But I do think I think he should be playing over Loner as long as the matchup dictates that. Like against Oklahoma State, for instance, they were having trouble rebounding, so Loner had to play some more minutes than he has been recently. But I do think that Bonner has carved out a little bit of a role to come in and play good defense. And if Keontae or Langston are off for a game or not playing well, turning the ball over, kind of being careless with their shot selection, then I think Dale is a guy that I think now they can probably count on more than they thought they could before Keontae got hurt.
Yeah, I mean, there's been nothing but, I think, inspired confidence from what we've seen here as of late that he can help fill roles where needed and when called upon, such as George's injury. And now I think it's just a matter of how healthy can Keontae George get. And Langston Love, how healthy is he going to be moving forward? But it's been huge, I think, especially in light of those things, to see Bonner pick up the ball and run with it. So, that's been great. It's been a great development. I think in light of some bad news and what could have been terrible news, that's been a bright spot, actually. Osos Del Rio Brazos, random one for y'all. If you had to put money on the next Big 12 school to replace the head football coach, which would it be and why?
Neil Brown. And a lot of this comes down to the schedule, and a lot of this just comes down to they have not produced wins on the field. And so I think he's the coach that's on the hottest seat going into this season, and it makes a lot of sense, sadly, because I do think he's a decent coach.
Yeah, I think he's a nice guy and probably a better coach than given credit for. But, I mean, it is what it is results-wise right now in Morgantown. And, last year I never felt like he was ever in super grave danger of losing his job, but I did feel like his seat was getting warm. And by the end of the year, I don't think that had really improved all that much. So now you hope that they can get things on track, but this does seem to me like it's probably the final run. You have a new AD that's in there and in place now, so that's just always one of those things where you just kind of put two and two together, and I would imagine this is one of those like, hey, go out and earn your job and save your job by going and winning some games, but I think it's going to be potentially tough sled. So I think he's just a no-brainer. When you're lining up the coaches in the Big 12, he is the number one, I think, pretty clearly. So, yeah, I'd go with him as well. Enable, what do you see as Baylor's ceiling floor of the national tournament as a 2-seed versus a 3-seed?
I honestly, this is just me being super honest here. I think it all comes down to draw. I'm not really sure that there's a huge difference between the 2 or 3 seed. I think it really just comes down to who are the teams that you're having to play, whether it's, I guess, a 6 seed for a 3 seed or a 7 seed for a 2 seed. Like, who are those matchups and what do those look like? Because as I look at kind of the 6 and 7 seeds that would be on the bracket, I just don't think they're, that crazy. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have to play a 2 or a 3 seed in order to make it further into the tournament. So, I believe that'd be to go to the Elite 8, right? If you're able to beat a 2 or a 3 seed, then you'd have to play the 1 or the 4. So, yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
I think that the ceiling is still making a Final Four, which means if you make the Final Four, you can win a national championship. So that's still the ceiling if you're a 2 or a 3 seed. The floor, the 3 versus 14, I guess, is a little scarier than the 2 versus 15. But I think either way, Baylor will make it through the first round. But I still think the floor for this team is losing in the second round.
Yeah, I think the ceiling's pretty high, but the floor is not far away if you're not careful.
Do you see any difference between the 2 or the 3 seed, like major outside of what the draw looks like?
Without knowing what the bracket looks like, it's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure those more well-versed in tournament bracketology and things like that could point out quickly of like how there's a massive difference, but I'm not clearly the one to talk to about that. But yeah, on the surface note, to me, it all depends on what the rest of that bracket looks like and who is positioned where. Without that information, it's a little harder to determine. But yeah, maybe there's something a little more simpler to it than that. But yeah, I definitely think that, Sweet 16 is not just some guarantee, as we've seen. Like that's harder said than done, no matter how good this team has been. So certainly one where you feel good about the first round, and then beyond that, it's anyone's guess because of however the rest of it lines up. Landon's me, and I don't know, I'm maybe butchering that, but Landon's me. Early prediction on better football unit in 2023, offense or defense, can either be top 10 to 15.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Dave Aranda's track record here and say the defense will be the better unit next year. And I think for this team to really reach their ceiling, I think it does need to be like that. I mean, you'd like them to be very similar, but I do think the defense will be a little bit better. I think they can probably get close to top 15 on defense. Offensively, I think the ceiling for me at this very moment is probably like top 25, I would say. That's best case.
Defensive head coach, I don't think that always means that your defense will be your stronger unit, but I do think given that both sides are losing a good amount, but especially with the offense having to replace the entire line, and I know some people will point out, well, that's not as big of a deal as some people make it out to be. But I think there's uncertainty at quarterback. I think there's uncertainty at the skill positions. I think there's uncertainty on the offensive line. I think the only thing you feel super great about is on paper you had a good transfer portal class, but really the only thing that you know for sure is you've got a good freshman running back coming back who by the end of the year, though, was like he was just out of gas. And the beating that he had taken as a young player had really started to add up. And you like your full, healthy tight end room as far as the young guys go. But outside of that, a couple receivers flashed. You don't know that much. So because of all that uncertainty, I will side with the defense, even though it's got some questions as well and is also replacing some guys. But I'm not going to go top 15 for either one. I don't believe either one is in that position to be that good just yet. No, I don't think that's in the cards, but we'll see. That's what they're going to get to work on and have been in the weight room all these last few weeks and will soon be out on the field to try and earn something like that distinction, but that's not in sight for me. It's just too high of a mark.
Very fair.
Blantham 4. When out OU Texas were planning their departure from the Big 12, did they not plan on having to pay the remaining members to leave? In other words, were they just assuming the conference would collapse without them and there would be no exit fee to have to pay? Compared to the rest of the new Big 12, how do you think Baylor's doing with NIL? Thanks, Will. Thank you for the questions. Let's start off with the exit fee question. One thing I've still wondered along the way, and I've asked Mac Rhodes about this, and I don't think anybody other than Oklahoma and Texas really know for sure, but, there's the whole 18-month, I guess you inform the conference of your decision, right, within 18 months of your departure. So there's that whole thing that you have to take care of, but we never really reached that point because far before the 18 months, whenever that was planning on being, like, we don't know when Oklahoma and Texas were going to make their grand announcement because they never made the announcement. It was made initially by Brent Zorneman from, I believe it was the Houston Chronicle. And so that's how we all found out. When would we have found out is my question if that story never came to pass. If nobody from the A&M side of things leaks that because they're upset about what's occurring and the fact that they're about to be joined by Oklahoma and Texas in this conference that has been a huge advantage for them. Without that, when do we find out about this and how does that affect the rest of what occurred after that? Do they go get the same 4 teams in expansion? Is the Pac-12 in the position they're in right now? Does the Big 12 have 4 teams and a new TV deal and all that already set up? Or are we still sitting here, or maybe we've just now here recently found out about their departure, and then where does that leave the Big 12 conference? So that's a really interesting question that I'm sure at some point in time, like Chris Del Conte will write a book or Joe Castiglione or something, and we'll figure out how that was supposed to go down originally. But to answer that question, I think that they probably banked on the conference collapsing to some extent and thought, hey, we'll probably not have to pay as much as one would expect, but that's just me speculating. I don't know for sure because, again, we're not completely clear on their original intentions when it came to that exit. It was all blown out of the water as soon as that newspaper article came out.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think their hope was they weren't going to have to pay anything. And
got close.
Obviously, they did. But that didn't end up happening. So, yeah, I think I'm kind of right there with you on that. And I think they were planning on just getting out of the conference and being A-OK, not having to pay a cent and go to the SEC and make a ton of money. But the Big 12, I guess, got lucky. But also, at the end of the day, they made it happen. And the Big 12 continues to make things happen, which has been very encouraging to see.
So if we ever find out the full details, maybe the Angry Eight, or however you refer to them, maybe they owe a little bit of a debt of gratitude to the A&M side of things for popping that when they did and creating the situation where the Big 12 was able to find a life raft rather than just being out in the middle of the ocean with no help whatsoever, like could have been the case if that worked out a different way. Compared to the rest of the new Big 12, how do you think Baylor's doing with NIL?
Yeah, I think they're, I'd say probably middle of the pack. I think that there's a few schools that are doing NIL better. I would say, though, of the schools in the new Big 12, it's not a massive advantage for really any of these schools. Like, I haven't sat here and seen these massive deals for really any of the new schools and the schools that are currently in the conference now. It's been a lot of OU in Texas, obviously, NIL-wise. So I still think Baylor's going to be just fine competing with the other schools in the Big 12 to an extent, but they're definitely not at the forefront of it in the conference. They're more so kind of in the middle right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's, always now going to be a concern of sort of where's your NIL situation, and some of it's public and clear, and some of it's not so clear. I do think Oklahoma and Texas leaving should help their status as far as where they rank within the conference, but they're not as out there visibly as like Texas Tech has been. TCU obviously as well.
You would think Houston
riding a hot hand.
Might be starting to get there as well.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah,
I think what's holding them back probably fully is Holgerson and the belief there. Like, I mean, as far as if you really want to get that thing kick-started and going, I think you really get that humming along when you're winning games too. Yeah. And so that's kind of the question is like, can you really fully invest in him? You know what I mean? Yeah. In this version of the program. But yeah, I mean, they could certainly get the bank accounts fired up.
Yeah, and the good news I will say on the basketball side of things is that really hasn't mattered a whole lot, because since there's just so few high-profile athletes, a lot of those guys are just getting NIL deals on their own, and it doesn't really matter what the school's providing for them, because it's just like I'm getting this much here. Why do I need to worry about what school I go to paying me this much? And I think that's been huge, on the Baylor side of things. They're going to be recruiting just fine on the basketball side. But football's a little bit tougher because you got so many guys on the roster, and you got schools like Texas Tech who are paying everyone a certain amount of money, or TCU, and everyone's getting to that point where it's just like everybody's getting this much money, and here we go. So, yeah, definitely something to think about. Like I said, I just think Baylor's kind of in the middle, but here's the thing. There's really not that many teams in the Big 12 that are really killing it NIL-wise right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think you'll also see a lot of the separation that people are talking about. I mean, when Texas and Oklahoma are in the SEC, or UCLA and USC, they're obviously all going to be making far more money, and that's where some of the advantage comes into play. I mean, it is TV slots and things like that, matchups. But, yeah, more money, and that's something that the Big 12 is going to have to figure out how to navigate, and then each institution is going to have to just, get their alumni together and hope they've got some people with some money to burn that want to contribute to, NIL funds and things like that. And, I mean, burn so much is just it's a departure from when you were just, hey, I'm contributing to a facility, or I'm contributing to this. Now it is, for a smaller fan base as well, it's a lot more of an ask. You don't have 100,000 living alumni like you do at a lot of other places like A&M, for example, where, it just seems like the money's on a printing machine where it's just brrr all the time. So, yeah, that's something to monitor for sure. Pawpaw Bear, do you think this year's men's basketball team will make it further in the tournament than next year, i.e. Elite 8 this year, Sweet 16 next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hard to predict, so I got to go with the team that's already established themselves as probably a 2 seed. I think next year's team's going to be really good, and I think they can be better than this year's team, but I just think that's hard to predict when we haven't even seen them play, whereas we've gotten to see this year's team, play. I do think that for this Baylor program, expectation should be competing for a Final Four, which means you shouldn't be losing in the first 2 rounds very often. I think that's the expectation now, as just this Baylor fan base and the Baylor program in general. So, yeah, I think I'm going to go with this year's team because I already have a 2 seed in my back pocket, whereas I don't know what next year's team specifically is going to look like, who's going to return, and how good the other teams are going to play are.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty salty roster, so I don't know that you're going to guarantee to have a roster as good as this one next year, as deep and as talented as they are. I mean, there's no Keontae George on next year's roster the way it stands right now, and that's just one player. But, I mean, there's obviously a lot more to the team than just that.
Might be better.
Okay, well, fair enough.
remember, a lot of this has to do with how your team's constructed, right? And Jacoby's longer, taller, so maybe he's better defensively. It's, you're comparing apples to oranges here, but I do think there's some reasons to believe they could be better. But again, we have to know, in my opinion, that Jalen Bridges is coming back and that LJ Crier's coming back.
Right.
Until you know those two pieces, you're very much guessing.
Doc Crowell, what will you be looking for once spring ball starts?
Yeah, so quickly, I had a list here of stuff that I'm looking forward to. Quarterback battle, offensive line combinations, defensive back rotation, and then as far as specific players, Sawyer Robertson, Keytron Jackson, Caden Siraki, Jackie Marshall, Kyan Roberts-Day, Josh White, Corey Gordon, Reggie Bush. Those are just a few of the things that I'm really intrigued by, and if Baylor can really hit on those specific players I mentioned, I think it could mean great things for them going forward into 2023.
I'll be looking for some just interesting quotes, just some interesting factoids to chew on to tie us over to the summertime. Position changes for one, like we mentioned earlier, things like that of interest. Those are the types of like news nuggets that I enjoy, or just interesting quotes, like I said. But some of the names you mentioned, would be good to check them out. I mean, this isn't like NFL training camp where it's like the season starts right away. This is like a thing that happens, and then they take a long break away from the public eye. But it will be fun to be out there. And I don't know how many questions they'll answer, but there will be some minor questions at the very least that we will get some answers to, and that's always fun. How would you categorize baseball's performance thus far?
Not good, but not surprising.
Yeah, pretty bad results-wise.
Yeah, we mentioned, and I believe this, I thought 30 wins was kind of their best case, right? You win 30 games, that's a pretty solid year for the roster that they have, but I don't know if they're even going to get to that. They got blown out by Duke, and
they're more likely to give up 30 than a given game than to win 30 games.
They gave up over 20 runs twice this weekend, and just the problem is they keep having this one inning where they just get slaughtered, and it's just unbelievable. And that happens in baseball. Thanks Snowball, but it's really happened to them a lot. Good news. 13 straight games at home, including series against Youngstown State and Mercer. If they're going to have any hope at getting to that 30-win mark, they're going to have to make up a lot of ground over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, it's not been good. It's not all that surprising, but yeah, just giving up 20 on a regular basis that's no bueno. That's something that's going to be. It's going to be a long season if you're doing that on a regular basis, and they're just getting kicked off basically here these first few weeks. So that's something to monitor and to be a little bit concerned about. But, yeah, we'll see how it goes. Got to be patient with the rebuild or reconstruction, or however you want to refer to the program's current state. If you had to pick one fall sport to win the conference in 23-24, which would it be and why? I'll say football, because that's what brings the bucks. That would be, I think, if Dave Aranda could go out and win the Big 12 in football in fall 23-24 would be huge.
Is he saying who do you want to win, or who do we think will win the conference?
If you had to pick one fall sport I don't know. So,
if obviously it'd be football if we're just picking.
Yeah,
which one
that's
we would
the
want.
easy answer. But who I think, gosh, I have no idea at the moment.
Volleyball.
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's a tough question. If it's going to be like, who do we actually think will win? Obviously, if you're picking one, it'd be football. But yeah, I guess I go with volleyball. There's still some momentum there with Coach McGuire and company. The problem there is the fact that Texas is there, and Texas is always so good at volleyball. Yeah, but those are the ones that are coming to mind immediately for me.
Trying to think of other fall sports. And I have no idea what next year's teams look like in the fall. So, yeah, football is the easy answer to like what you would want to see, because that would be the most impactful. But, yeah, maybe volleyball. Maybe Ryan McGuire and company can get over that Longhorn hump. Mm-hmm. But that will be a good side effect, you would think, to the conference changes coming up, would be that Texas will no longer be standing in your way, but eventually you'll have to run into them at some point, if you're that good. But yeah, maybe volleyball. Panther City Bear, do you believe Baylor's better defensively without Keontae George? If so, do you think there may be tournament games where Bonner's on the floor late with George on the bench?
Yeah, I do think Baylor's better defensively without Keontae George on the court, but I think they're much better offensively with him on the court. And so it's just kind of varying that difference there. And I'll also say I do think there's a tournament game where either Langston Love or Dale Bonner is on the floor and Keontae's on the bench, but I think that would have to be Keontae's not playing well for that to happen. They're not going to bench him if he's playing well.
You don't bench the lottery pick in crunch time in the NCAA tournament. That would be a bad look and an indictment of him, as a player.
He'd have to be playing bad. Like, he'd have to be like 2 for 8 with 4 turnovers and like 4 points. And then it's like, okay, maybe we need to put in someone to play defense. Maybe that's possible. But I think, Dale's played great for what he's needed to, but when you get to tournament time, I still think this team's going to need some big performances from Keontae George.
Yeah, I mean, that's why he's here, is for this upcoming time period as much as anything else. So, yeah, I think he's going to be on the floor, but they are certainly better defensively, with the change. Do you believe there will be conference shuffling and realignment this summer with Pac-12 or West Coast G5 schools? Which G5 would you want from the Pacific time zone? I mean, there's been a lot of realignment talk lately. Yeah, I think that if anything's going to happen here pretty soon, it's going to probably be San Diego State and SMU to the Pac-12 as they iron out their ongoing TV negotiations. Outside of that, it's hard to really picture anything substantial going on. So I would say, probably would have to be sometime in these next few months as they work out that TV deal. So I'll say yes on that. And San Diego State would definitely be one of those West Coast G5 schools you're referring to. Which G5 would you want from the Pacific time zone, though? I don't really want anybody from the G5 Pacific time zone if I'm the Big 12, quite honestly. I'm not really looking to pick up a San Diego State or someone along those lines. I'm big dog hunting, or I'm not hunting at all if I'm the Big 12, and that would mean that some things have to happen, like the Pac-12 would have to start to dismantle, but I don't think that's really in the cards right now. So, I do believe the Pac-12 will expand, but beyond that, I don't see the other stuff happening.
Yeah, I think the Big 12 is going to pick up Pac-12 schools in the summer. I think that the Pac-12 is going to get a media deal that they don't like, and I think that's going to lead to either them doing unequal revenue sharing, and if they do that, I think that's going to make schools really mad, and I think some will decide that they need to leave. So I think that's more likely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. They should not take a group of 5 school, with the exception being Gonzaga, but they're basketball only.
Asterisk.
Yeah, I would take them, though. I think that would make some sense for the Big 12 as a basketball conference. But no, the Boise States, the San Diego States, those don't really move the needle for me, and nor really should they for the Big 12 when they're in such a great position to pick off a couple Pac-12 schools and then look at the ACC already. Now they're on shaky ground with the comments that happened this week. So just wait for those 2 conferences to start losing pieces and then take from those, because you'll get more high-quality programs.
This isn't by any means the last round of shuffling that's going to go on here in the next few years. So, I think everybody's calculated with their chess moves right now, and we'll see the Pac-12 just trying to figure out their end of the TV deal. But the Big 12 not just setting themselves up for this near term, but I think looking long-term as well. And, I don't think you need to go and bloat the roster. Just adding teams to add teams is not going to be beneficial for you, and if anything, dilutes the product. So, you don't need to add Boise State, all due respect, or San Diego State or anything like that. San Diego State, if you were expanding like massively on the West Coast and you were adding Oregon, Washington, that would make more sense. But that's I'm not ready to think that the Pac-12 is fizzling out just yet. I think that they find the TV deal, and then years down the line, maybe people start to get ready to jump off the ship, but I'm not ready to go there just yet. Alpha Needle, Grayson, what do you think about ATO winning Baylor Sing this year?
Yeah, honestly, unbelievable. So when I was at Baylor, I did the whole thing, sing and float and all that. And we were great at intramurals. We won intramurals multiple times when I was in college. And that was kind of the big thing that I focused on when I was in college, just being the chair for that. But float and sing, we were always like 3rd or just making pigskin and never could get over that hump. And sing especially, we felt like, there were a couple times where we had good ones and just, didn't place it. There's a lot of really good ones at Baylor, but we took it really seriously. And I honestly enjoyed it. It was fine. It was fun for what it was, and it was one of those traditional things that I liked. But I told my wife that they had won, and we both were like, what? Like, so cool. And it's the first time ATO's won since I can remember. It might be the first time ever. And she was in Kappa, and they've won multiple times. So it was nice to get a little get not even payback, but finally see ATO win. I believe they won with Kaio. So really cool, really special, and really proud of those guys for winning that. Very, very cool.
Well, thank you, Alpha Needle. Congrats to ATO as well. And we do appreciate everybody for their questions this week. That also included Panther City Bear and Doc Crowell and Papa Bear and B. Lantham and Landon and Enibel and Osos del Rio Brazos, Scotty B as well. Thanks to all of you for your questions this week and everybody out there for listening and being a part of the show as we get here to wrap it up time. But as we do that, do you have any parting words or messages for those out there listening?
Yeah, just if you're not a premium subscriber, please do so. We have a lot of great content. Our Athlete Plus content is going to start to ramp up a little bit. I know Paul just had an interview with Clark Barrington, which is on the website right now. So if you're an Athlete Plus subscriber, which obviously contributes to the NIL fund for Baylor athletes, very helpful for the program and also very, very helpful for the players as well. So be sure to check that out. And of course, we have all kinds of other features on the website as well, the premium side of things. And then be sure to check out 365 Sports Radio Monday through Friday, 3 to 6 for all your college sports coverage.
Yeah, I mean, all I can ask for, is for Baylor supporters out there to be a part of the website, sign up for the premium section. That's a good way to contribute to a lot of different things, really at once, quite frankly, and just show your support for what we do. But outside of that, just hit subscribe and spread the word and tell a friend about where we are, just in case the word hasn't spread to everybody just yet. Just keep growing this thing, and your listening and contributing and supporting is something that we truly do appreciate. Garrett Ross behind the scenes, appreciate the work you're doing at all times, but with this podcast as well. And again, one final time, thanks to everybody out there listening. We'll be back next Tuesday at around right at noon, kicking off here on the YouTube channel live each Tuesday at noon. Of course, you can check us out on all the various podcast feeds after the fact as well. 365 Sports coming your way this afternoon at 3 o'clock, as Grayson mentioned. Talk to you then. This has been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com, 365 Sports.